We, we're familiar with the idea of Thailand as being a kind of a devoutly Buddhist country, but the early days of Wat Pah Pong, as they say, forest monks were not well known to people. They were familiar with village monks, and the practices of forest monks, say eating one meal a day, eating in their bowl, and various ascetic practices, made them seem kind of rather forbidding to many lay people. Some would be very inspired with them, of course, but this in turn created some problems with the monks in the local village monasteries, where the standards of the discipline not kept very well, in which the monks are often not very inspiring at all. But that hadn't really been a problem when there weren't forest monks to compare them with. So that there was some kind of dislike and jealousy and fear of the influence of the forest monks. So this was an aspect of life for Ajahn Chah and his community in the early days, sort of diplomatic relations with the Sangha in the towns and cities, who certainly administrative monks can exert power over them, so have to be very careful not to rub people in power up the wrong way. So this is a whole kind of different side of monks' life, isn't it, that you don't probably think about. Whereas the village people themselves, because they're in a forest which had been generally perceived as common land for a long time, then the monks going and living in that forest was not pleasing to everyone. There are all these stories about this ghost that was looking after the forest, and various people who tried to cut trees down and have terrible things happen to them and so on. But the particular incidents that arose in early years were, for one, there was a well in which local people would take water from, and the local people, their standards of hygiene not always so high, and the monastic code, there's a very high standard of hygiene. So Ajahn Chah wanted to have a separate well or separate water from the lay people and from the monks. But the story got to the local village that you heard these monks, these forest monks, and they've taken over the well and they won't let anybody have the water. Who do they think they are? And then this particular was sort of one of the leaders of the village community came in. He was going to sort Ajahn Chah out. But he met Ajahn Chah and they had a long conversation through the night. He ended up becoming one of Ajahn Chah's disciples when he explained to him fully what was happening. Another time, and also almost an echo of something that happened in the Buddhist time, where it was a group of villagers who were unable to hunt in the forest and to gather mushrooms in the same way that they could. Now the monks were there, got very angry with the monks, and a plan was hatched where this young woman would come out from behind a tree while Ajahn Chah was on arms round and give him a hug, and then scream that he'd raped her. And somebody in the village got wind of this and went and told Ajahn Chah. He said, "Don't go Bindabat, don't go on arms round anymore. There's this terrible thing going to happen." This woman, and he says, "Forget it." He says, "Bring him on." He says, "I've always wanted a young woman to give me a hug. Let's see what it's like." but in actual fact, they were too afraid, and it never happened. And the conflicts about people releasing dogs and animals, stealing fruit from the monastery, and these are all things that Ajahn Chah had to be very subtle and skillful with. And so he had other skills that he had in diplomacy and gradually drawing people in and not being divisive and not being too harsh with things, explaining the reason. This is why we do these things. We don't want dogs being released into the monastery because there are a lot of wild animals here, and we want to keep the wild animals for posterity, for our children's children and so on. So that worked out. And as far as the local monasteries were going, then he would, as time went on, and the Wat Papongs had to receive more offerings. Then anything that was surplus, he'd share it with the local village monasteries, create those kinds of bonds of friendship. And an important, once a year, twice a year, he would take the whole Sangha of his whole community of monks in to pay respects to the senior administrative monks in the city, to bow and to ask for forgiveness, and then you see, in those days, the forest monks didn't have the same kind of prestige and respect that they had. They were kind of seemed like kind of ruffians, vagabonds, and people like full of superstition. They don't really know the true teachings. They don't know Pali language. They don't know the suttas, and they just sort of make stuff up as they go along, and so this sense of contempt and dislike for forest monks. And
would that just be amongst monks?
Yes.
More than lay people.
Yeah. And so a turning point was when a monk called Ajahn Mahamon, who you know very well, who was quite a well-known local scholar, gave up his kind of his academic career, as it were, and moved into the forest and declared himself a disciple of Ajahn Chah. And that was quite a big thing for monks in Ubon who knew him or knew about him. That someone who obviously was a good scholar, knew or was that impressed with Ajahn Chah and what he was doing there, that he was willing to become his disciple. Plus, Ajahn Chah was very skillful, I think, in encouraging his monks to take the various monastic exams, the Naptam exams, and their results were very, very good, just to prove to the local Sangha again that these are not just sort of country hicks. These are very intelligent, committed men who are also interested in the Pariyatti side and not completely rejecting it.